Post from for_Frodo87. Police officers of Reddit. What are you thinking when you see cases like George Floyd? Comment from GamerPopo. I am a police officer in a medium-sized suburban town in Texas. I have been in law enforcement for 14 years. I love my job. I love how I get to help people and I love how I get to cause positive changes in people's lives. I love how 99.9% of the time, my badge is shiny. Today my badge is not shiny. I am tired of hearing the excuses given by other people for a police officer's misconduct. I am tired of excuses being made for people who tarnish my badge. I am so tired of hearing how officers have a stressful job and their misconduct was a result of that stress. You know who else is under stress? The people who called us. That person whose loved one just committed suicide. The family who called us because they found grandma dead and now we're asking everyone questions. The 7-Eleven clerk who just had a gun shoved in his face. And even the guy we just put in handcuffs and told him he is losing his freedom. Sorry, but our stress is low compared to these folks. We might have to go into these situations, but we get to leave them and pretend none of that shit ever happened after our shift is over. I am tired of hearing excuses for the bad police officers. I am tired of the excuse, well, he puts his life in danger. Sure, I know we put our lives in danger. I've had guns, knives and even swords pulled on me. I've responded to bomb threats, suicidal subjects, assaults in progress, robberies in progress, etc. You know who else puts their lives in danger? Firefighters, deep-sea fishermen, loggers, people who step foot outside their homes in Chicago. We are trained to deal with danger. We are provided with equipment and training to help us survive those dangers. Do I face an increased risk of not going home? Sure. But that's why I am at an increased level of awareness at work. So I can respond to threats appropriately without panic and over-responding. I am tired of hearing about the thin blue line. I believe in the thin blue line. I believe in looking out for my fellow officers. I don't believe in hiding the misconduct or unlawfulness of other officers. And I have always spoken up. What many forget. Standing behind the thin blue line doesn't mean concealing the misconduct of other officers. It means confronting those officers so they don't do something to ruin their lives, the lives of others, or violate the law or code of conduct. It means walking up to the officer with his knee on a suspect's neck and saying, "Dude, this is too much. Stop," before the officer commits murder. It means walking up to the officer who has been drinking all night and saying, "Dude, I'll give you a ride home." Instead of hiding misconduct, prevent it. Help your fellow officer not do something to ruin his life or another's life. If you do see misconduct, address it. Take it to the appropriate level. Stop tarnishing my badge. We took an oath to uphold the law, uphold our ethics and protect our communities. Sometimes that means arresting other police officers or holding them accountable for policy, ethics violations. This officer violated the rights of George Floyd and murdered him through his actions. The officers who were on scene and failed to act are just as responsible. There are multiple videos of this incident and there is no real question as to what happened. For those folks who wonder what makes it murder or manslaughter, murder is the act of causing death to another human being through an action which a reasonable person would know, or intend, could result in the death of the victim. Manslaughter is the act of causing death through an act which is reckless in nature. Every officer in America is taught about positional asphyxiation, and while some departments allow neck restraints, all officers are taught the dangers of neck restraints and are taught not to apply pressure to the back of someone's neck or head when they are proned out on the ground in handcuffs. Floyd was handcuffed with little resistance and they were able to walk him across the street to a patrol unit. Floyd can be seen in a surveillance video falling to the ground next to the unit on the sidewalk side of the unit. Cell phone footage then shows the officer on top of Floyd's neck on the opposite side of the unit. The street side. There is a random man in the background telling Floyd just to get in the car and he can't win. Floyd can be heard saying he knows and he's done. This implies that Floyd may have resisted or attempted to escape, but was still restrained in the handcuffs. Floyd can be heard multiple times saying he can't breathe. The cell phone video shows the officer kneeling on top of Floyd's neck for at least 8 minutes, with around 4 of those minutes with Floyd being unconscious. Even if Floyd did attempt to resist or escape, there was no reason to hold him down for 8 minutes. What was the point of restraining him for so long? Why did the other officer not assist the primary officer with restraining Floyd so they could get him in the patrol unit quicker? Why did the primary officer continue to restrain Floyd by his neck after Floyd became unresponsive? Why can the officer be heard at some point asking Floyd if he is still a tough guy? I can only come up with one answer to all of these questions. And that was the primary officer. Chauvin wanted to prove to Floyd that Floyd was not such a tough guy. I see an officer assaulting another human being, going beyond taking control of a suspect, using force as punishment and ultimately causing the death of another human being. I see a second officer who stood and watched and did nothing, despite knowing that what the first officer was doing was a violation of law and policy. I see officers who were trying to get back at Floyd for running his mouth and resisting an arrest by using force they knew could result in death or serious bodily injury in a situation which did not justify using deadly force. This officer committed murder. Plain and simple. This officer tarnished my badge and the badges of all police officers. Worst of all, this officer tortured his victim for 8 minutes. Imagine your last thoughts and memories being those of a police officer, a person who the public is supposed to be able to trust, placing his body weight on your neck, slowly asphyxiating you against hot asphalt while he asks you if you're still a tough guy. I hope this officer, and any officer who allowed this to happen, is tried and convicted. It's going to be some time before I can polish my badge back to a shine. In the meantime, a family is suffering. A community is burning. All because of one guy who should have never been an officer. What do I think? I think assholes like this make my job that much harder and damage the trust I work so hard for. I think assholes like this ruin people's lives and ruin families. I think assholes like these should be stuck in a prison with all of the people they ever arrested. Comment from Captain Comsock 69. For all the police officers here, what would the charges be if one of the bystanders pulled the police officer off of the poor guy? Wow, thanks for gold. Comment from McFeely_smackup. I'm a former police officer, and so have had plenty of training in physical restraint of individuals being arrested. There is no police academy training officers to kneel on someone's neck to subdue them. That's how you kill a person. There is extensive training on how to avoid seriously injuring a person while restraining them. And I guarantee you every one of these officers was trained to never strike a person in the neck or choke them. The officer who killed him is very clearly liable for manslaughter at the very least. And I think the other officers who stood by have some accountability as well, because they knew damn well that was not how you handle a person, and should have stepped up. Comment from Wolfhound 1142. Absolutely sick to my stomach. I'm a lieutenant in my hometown police department. I started my day by showing the video to my officers and making sure my people understood that this is murder. Plain and simple. You never, outside of a life and death struggle, do anything like this. George Floyd was handcuffed and on the ground. If he was still struggling badly enough that they felt a need to hold him down, there's 100 ways to do it safely. Use of force should always be as measured and considered as possible. There will always be times where an officer sees danger and has to make a split-second decision without the luxury of weighing the consequences. That clearly was not the case here. He had all the time in the world to think about what he was doing. He had multiple people there telling him to stop, and none of his fellow officers intervened. All of that is why I find this incident particularly disgusting. They had so many chances to do the right thing. Luckily, I have the fortune of working with good people who see this shit for what it is. Before the video was over, before I told them that George Floyd died because of this, my officers were muttering things like, "What the fuck is he doing? You can't do that shit," and "He needs to get off the man's fucking neck." Made me way prouder to be their leader than any number of arrests they could make to see that their instincts were not to defend the officer. For what it's worth, I'm glad that they were fired. I've heard mention in this thread that one of the officers has been arrested. Which is great if true. I hope they're all brought to justice. Their actions, and lack thereof, were completely unconscionable. Comment from Godsfallen. Not a local. Am a Fed. 5 years into the job. George Floyd was murdered and it's fucking disgusting. We're trained that anything involving the neck is a no-go and is considered deadly force. We were also trained that if you make an arrest in a prone position, you search and then immediately move them onto their side or a seated position because the risk of asphyxiation is so great. If a suspect says they can't breathe, believe them and take measures to correct to it. This training is reinforced at least twice a year in our use of force training. These officers deserve to spend the rest of their lives in prison. Comment from Meathead12. Retired after 28 years. Nothing less than murder. All the guys I worked with would never have considered doing something like that. You treat combative in custodies once they're secured as human beings. Nothing should be personal. Once they've been subdued and you are safe as an officer, you stand him up, pat him down and understand that your arrestee is at a low point in his life. Give him some dignity and you'll generally get his respect. It works 90+% of the time. That man was subdued and nobody should have been on him at that point. Comment from Neandythal. I'm a police officer in California. I am absolutely disgusted by the office's actions. When someone is in our custody, you must treat them properly. I don't care if they are arrested for murder or forgery. They are a human with a story and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. I had tears streaming down my face watching the video of George Floyd. We swore to protect our communities and that's what we set out to do every day. Putting a knee into the neck of a handcuffed man for an extended period of time isn't protecting. A man has lost his life due to the gross negligence of an evil person. May he rest in peace. Comment from the barking dog. Cop here. Disgusted. There are 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't have happened. Simple. Easy. Steps that should have been taken. Lessons that policing has learned over the past 200 years and basic things taught in every academy. Make no mistake. This was murder. Maybe not premeditated murder, but nonetheless murder. I will be angry if those officers do not get indicted. Comment from deleted. Comment from findingKlemo. I am a police officer in the UK. I always find these things so hard to watch. Your natural instinct is to want to find a way to justify the actions of a fellow officer, but I'm finding more and more often that is becoming impossible. This video is one of the absolute worst things I've ever seen and there is no justifiable reason for it to have happened. George Floyd was murdered and that is the bottom line. Nobody is above the law and putting on a uniform does not mean you should be allowed special dispensation to behave like an animal. Positional asphyxia and the risks are drummed from day one of training. As soon as someone is restrained, you have to have them in a position where they can breathe freely. To have someone screaming they can't breathe and to have them pinned down by the neck whilst they slowly die. Knowing all this and doing nothing to help. Not only is that murder, but I would say that is torture, and the sheer fear George Floyd must have felt in the moments before he passed makes me feel sick to my stomach. In the UK it's also drummed into you that your first priority above anything else is to save life and limb, regardless of who the person is or what they may or may not have done. We don't all have guns, so we have to learn to try and diffuse situations by talking to people. If someone needs restraining in the UK, you'll often see at least 5 officers holding one person. It's not because we use excessive force. It's because each officer can control a section of the body, limbs and head, so that we don't have to resort to utter ridiculousness like kneeling in someone's neck. And this is another reason I find this video so shocking. It seemed to me that there were enough officers around that if they really felt it necessary to secure George Floyd, they could have done so in a way which meant he didn't have to lose his life. By no means are the UK perfect in their policing. You only have to look at the investigations into Stephen Lawrence's murder or the shooting of Jean-Charles de Menezes to see that, but first cannot understand how regularly law enforcement in the US are shown to be using excess force against people of color. And fundamentally it's an issue of institutional racism. And when the bare bones of the institution are steeped in racism, how do you ever combat it? Finally, I want to say, my heart goes out to the family of George Floyd and to the community he is part of. It's devastating that this has happened to you, and I hope you get the justice you deserve. Comment from randomhuman_23. Didn't the same happen in New York a few years ago with Eric Garner being put in a chokehold? Comment from niece_try_mod. I was a cop in the military. In the police academy, this was one of the things that taught us not to do, as it could crush the windpipe. The only time I was ever taught to use chokes and neck holds was in combat training for deployments. But when we got back, we always had to attend retraining classes to relearn what we can do stateside. Comment from throwawayx0302. Sheriff's deputy here, and I must say that I am disgusted by the unnecessary loss of life. There are moments that make me regret what I do. And this is one of them. I've met my share of racists wearing a badge, and I'm ready for a career change. The oath we take is to uphold the law and Constitution. So for the officers on scene there that could have stepped in and prevented this, fuck you. One bad apple always ruins the bunch. Unfortunately, I pray for the George's family and that justice is served. Throwaway for obvious reasons, and yes, I'm a white male. Edit. Wasn't expecting this to blow up as it has. I am responding to you guys when I can, and I'm glad we can have a conversation about this. We do not unionize in my state for law enforcement. And I see many comments about systemic protection and abuse. I have never worked under a police union. But I have worked with people who were unionized, and I have heard my share of stories where law is protected by the union. Stories I hear are about union protection from bad leadership, but I can imagine those protections may extend further in cases such as this. Comment from impunto. As a son of a former police officer, my dad worked really hard to be an honest cop. His department was full of racists. They didn't like him because he was a decent cop. They couldn't do anything wrong on front of him. We saw the news together, and I saw him wipe a tear. But tried really hard to hide it. I know he's sad, and I don't wanna push him to talk about it. But we both know things like this is always gonna happen. And that is a really sad fact. I can't possibly understand why a human being would do something like this. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.